It is my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the judges of the Eastern District of Michigan to this special session of the court. We meet here today to receive the portrait of Thomas P. Thornton, a respected colleague and a dear friend. Let me begin, if I may please, by introducing you to the members of this court and to three members of the Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit. One of the joys and pleasures of welcoming them and introducing them to you is that they were our colleagues at one time and colleagues, of course, of Judge Thornton. To my right is seated Judge Damon Keith. To my left, Judge Cornelia Kennedy. And to her left, Judge Ralph Guy. And we welcome you and thank you for your attendance today. Now the colleagues of our bench, first on far right here on the bank is Judge Ralph Freeman, senior judge of this court, and then beginning on the right in the front row, my right that is, Judge John Fikens, Judge Robert Damasio, Judge Charlie Joyner, Judge James Harvey, Judge Julian Cook, Judge Avery Cohen, Judge Anna Taylor, and in the back row, starting again on the right, Judge Horace Gilmore, Judge George Woods, Judge Richard Sir Heinrich, Judge George LaPlata, Judge Lawrence Sadkoff, Judge Barbara Hackett, and Judge Patrick Douglas. You will note then that leaves only two members of the court who were unable to attend today, Judge James Churchill in Bay City and Judge Stuart Newblatt in Flint, and they sent their regrets. The committee was most fortunate in being able to commission Ms. Patricia Burnett for the portrait, one of the nation's foremost portrait artists and certainly a bright star in Michigan circles. Ms. Burnett convinced us of her talents with the portrait of Judge Lawrence Kubo. And as you know, that portrait is being displayed in the courtroom on the 7th floor. And we are certainly privileged to have you here today. Thank you very much for joining us. The president of the Detroit chapter of the Federal Bar Association is John Mayer, who coincidentally happens to be our district court executive. And I would now recognize him for a presentation.
May it please the court. This is my last public act as president of the Detroit chapter of the Federal Bar Association. I can think of no more pleasant or personally gratifying way to end my term of office than to appear here today in this representative capacity. I feel compelled to add a personal note. Although I only knew Judge Thornton 6 years, which is a small fraction of the time many of you knew him, we shared a deep and abiding respect for this court and for the Great Lakes. I cherish the memories of my conversations with Judge Thornton. Now, on behalf of the officers, executive board, and membership of the Detroit chapter of the Federal Bar Association, the members of the Portrait Committee, and the contributors whose names are printed in your program, it is my privilege and pleasure to present to the court and to the people of the Eastern District of Michigan this portrait of United States District Judge Thomas P. Thornton for permanent display in this courtroom where he presided for so many years. Now, we have to add another personal note here. Mrs. Rose Thornton, who herself was recently elected to the office of trustee in Grosse Pointe Shores, and thereby is also entitled to the title of honorable, has graciously consented to unveil the portrait, and so I'm going to ask the Honorable Rose Thornton to step forward for that purpose.
Judge Gilmore, will you pound that gavel You'll be smiling. Thank you.
You will have noticed that Ms. Thornton's name did not appear on the program. That's because she was only convinced yesterday that she would even say a few words to us. Thank you very much, Rose. Vincent J. Brennan hardly needs any introduction because if you're here to honor Tom Thornton, you certainly know Vince Brennan, aside from his other accomplishments. Vince has a response for us, if you would please.
Thank you, Judge Pratt, Judge of the Court of Appeals, Judge of the First District, and Judge Thornton, Rose. The portrait on the front of the program, which is a real keepsake for all of us, and that portrait really, which is carries that grin of Judge Thornton that we all remember. That grin that so often lightened this courtroom from tense moments. The grin that told people that he was talking to or listening to that he understood their problems. Judge Thornton, I often thought, could have written a book on how to be a judge because he counseled so many of us as we were beginning to be one. He counseled us not only in the correctness of decisions, but in the manner in which we should conduct ourselves in that office. He often said that we were appointed, not anointed. And he carried with this intense loyalty to the job as a judge, an intense loyalty to his colleagues. I was close to the judge, and I don't believe I ever heard him criticize any one of his colleagues. He was loyal to them, and if he had any criticism, it was to them directly and never to anybody else, regardless of how close that anybody else might have been to him. The excerpt from the memorial resolution on the inside cover of your program covers pretty well Judge's basic beliefs, and his loyalties, and his honor. I can only say that if these walls could talk, what a humorous tale they would unfold. Just to repeat, he would often, in tense moments, interject a slight story or a witticism that would relieve the tension of the moment and would usually bring quite a few chuckles from the audience. Judge Gilmore, you had the honor and pleasure of sitting here through all your hearings to come. From time to time, glance up and see this grin of his, which I'm sure all of us will try and frame and have close to us also. Thanks again.
Judge Thornton graced this courtroom for over 36 years. It's fitting and proper that his portrait should from this time forward gaze down upon this litigation precinct that he loves so dearly and serves so well. I count it as one of the highlights of my tenure on this bench that I served for over 15 years with Tom Thornton. I treasure my memories of him as a mentor and as a friend. Indulge me, if you will, please, with two anecdotes that involve Tom. Within a week after taking the bench here, I was invited to lunch with Steve Roth, Talbot Smith, and Tom. And during the lunch, I was asked what I was working on. And I informed them that I had a jurisdictional problem that was causing me some difficulty. Bear in mind that coming from the Oakland County Circuit Bench, we had no questions about jurisdiction. We took anything and everything, and there never any doubt that the court had jurisdiction. Well, They insisted that I give them the details, and then shortly after lunch I received a call from Steve Roth, and he told me that there were a couple of cases that he thought I had to check because they might be helpful to me and apt to the question that I had before me. I was still on the phone talking to Steve when Talbot Smith came in with 4 books in his hand, all marked, and gesturing for me to look at them and read them. He no sooner left than I got a call from Tom Thornton. Tom said that he had settled the case that he was on that morning, and that he and Cordelia were doing some checking, and he would call and let me know just what they'd found on my particular problem. Well, needless to say, I no longer felt a stranger on this bench, and I must concede that despite the remarkably high caliber of law clerks that I've had, the best and brightest were Roth, Smith, and Thornton. That threesome, incidentally, quickly became a foursome, and when Steve Roth came down from Flint and Bay City, we invariably had lunch together. Steve soon enlisted me in his pet project, discovering how many college teams Tom Thornton had played football. Steve had an obsessive suspicion, I might even say probable cause, that Tom had actually played for more colleges than he admitted. He thought 2 more than he admitted. Well, he enlisted my assistance to trap Tom, but Tom was far too clever for us. As soon as we started talking about it, he'd start telling us about some escapade that happened at Fordham or Tufts or wherever, and we got off on that track and never got back to trying to pin him down again. I finally concluded, incidentally, that Steve was wrong in his suspicions. Not exactly wrong. I think he was just confusing Tom's college teams with the professional teams he played for on the Sundays following the Saturday of college. And that is absolute truth. Right, Chris? I regret that I did not know Tom when he was a tiger. I only knew him as a pussycat. He had an enormous enthusiasm for life, for his friends, for the law, for everything that touched him. Never have I known a person so pleased, so happy that he could participate in living. An example of his outlook is revealed in this way. Judges talk to each other about their respective cases, and particularly those difficult cases. Difficult in the sense of being boring, time-consuming, where there's animosity among the clients or the lawyers, whatever it may be. Not once did I ever hear Tom complain, criticize, or express any discontent with any case that he was trying. Every case to him was just a wonderful experience. That perspective, enhanced by the delightful wit and sense of humor, I think, accounts in no small measure for his graciousness, his equanimity, and his longevity. Beyond question in all things, he was assisted and complimented mightily by the 2 women whom he cherished and were sources of his happy life. We are certainly delighted that Rose has joined with us in our gatherings, and we hope she continues to be a very valued member of our court family. Tom's legal ability was outstanding, and his experience as a trial lawyer sharpened those natural talents and found their fruition as an acclaimed trial judge. His opinions were brief but incisive and without irrelevancies and embellishments. Diligent and conscientious to a fault, he served this court for almost 20 years as a senior judge, when he could have hung up the robe in exchange for his skipper's cap. We were and are deeply in his debt, and fortunate to have known him as a colleague and a friend. Having pointed out some of his virtues, I would be remiss if I did not emulate one of them, his brevity at public functions. He said what needed to be said concisely and with great perception. An example of that admirable trait appears in the recorded proceedings of the presentation of the portrait of Steve Roth. As you know, he was very close to Steve. Called upon for his remarks, Tom said, and I quote him in full, Steve Roth was a highly intelligent and courageous judge, carrying out the functions of his office. He died on the firing line. Thank you. The applause that followed extended much longer than the time it took him to make those remarks. This portrait depicts Admiral, a stalwart, fair-minded, and dedicated jurist who made us proud just being on the same court with him. It also depicts a man for whom undoubtedly his colleagues had the deepest affection. On behalf of the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Michigan, the portrait of Thomas P. Thornton is gratefully accepted. We express our thanks to those who contributed so generously and to all of you who joined us today in Tom's honor. And again, we thank most heartily Ms. Burnett for the wonderful job that she has done in capturing. Thank you. Court is in recess.
Please rise. This session of court is now adjourned.